Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Travis McGrath. Thanks for joining us on today's Exago Support Lab. As usual, there are a lot of folks in the webinar who are regular attendees. So if you are coming for the first time, welcome. You are on mute, but if you have any questions, in the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar panel, there's a questions box. If you could give me a Y or a yes or a hello, just to indicate that you can see my screen and hear me all right, that's great. All right, perfect. See a bunch of those coming in, so that's great to see. So today's lab is going to be pretty high level. We're not going to go into code or too much technical detail. And it's going to be pretty short, but what we want to do here is give a good solid foundation of understanding for how one of the new features in 2019.1, which was just recently released, how it works, what it offers, and why we think it's great. And specifically, that's how time zone handling throughout the Exago platform is supported. So I'm just going to take a brief. Okay. All the initial questions here are just yeses and hellos. So we're going to move forward and move on. So first of all, in the overview, today's lab, we're going to talk about what are time zones, what's the problem with them, why are they difficult, how time zones were handled prior to 19.1, and now they're handled now moving forward from 19.1 and obviously with all future releases. So first of all, what are the problems with time zones? Or what are time zones, right? And everyone knows what a time zone is. It's that there's, along some political boundaries, it's a change in time from Greenwich Mean Time to offset with sunlight, right? So if you're on the east coast of the US, and the west coast of the US, you're 3 hours apart. But time zones are hard. It turns out that there are a lot of complicated parts about time zones. This is Tom Scott, famous computer file YouTuber. He did a great video. If you want to check it out, the link below will bring you to it, or if you just Google time zones and YouTube. It explains all the technical nuances of why time zones are difficult, but it really breaks down to just a couple of things. So the abridged version of his video, if you are interested in this kind of stuff in a deep way, definitely check it out. But they're complicated. They change by where you are, what time of year it is, what country you're in. They don't line up in really intuitive ways. And from a programming perspective, they offer two big challenges. One, your server and your user may be in different places and accordingly different time zones. So when a user says, I want this email to me at midnight or noon, they may mean a different midnight or noon than the place that the server resides, and you can end up with some tricky things there. And then the other challenge is that daylight savings is not a uniform thing. Even within a single country like the US, there are different places that handle daylight savings differently, and those can adjust from country to country as well. So because of daylight savings particularly, even if you know the offset between two locations, so if you know that the US and England are, say, 5 hours apart, that may change more than once per year. It may change a couple of different times depending what day it is and when each of those countries moves through daylight savings. So these are the two big challenges here. The server and the user being in different locations, and daylight savings time, meaning that there's not one single adjustment. It really may vary based on when something is being calculated. Great. So what can this impact? So in Exago specifically, this can impact a lot of things. This can impact your formulas. So for example, if your user and your server are in a different place and the user uses the now function on a report, they're going to get a date time returned for the current time, but that's going to be based on the server. So they may see something that's a few hours different than when they're actually running the report. It can change filter functions. So if your server is calculating a time, that's going to be impacted by those issues we talked about before, and that can impact filters, filter functions specifically. And it can impact scheduled reports, right? You could imagine sending something and saying, I want this emailed every day at 8 o'clock, and then daylight savings rolls around, and all of a sudden you're getting it an hour early or an hour late. Great, so those are some of the challenges. So how did Exago handle this in 18.2 and prior? So previously we had a couple of settings. So we had in the admin console, there was a culture setting called server time zone offset. And of course, this could be set through the API. So for each user, as the user launched Exago, the host app could say, for this session, this user is 3 or 4 hours away from our server, adjust this 3 hours. If they wanted, when you're configuring Exago, you wanted a more nuanced control, we had some extensibility features in our external interface, and we've covered the external interface in past support labs. So you could set it to say, Exago, when you need to calculate the time zone offset here, reach out to this custom code I have, and it'll tell you for that given user how much to adjust the time. So if you wanted to, you could write it yourself, but you had to set up some additional code and logic, and you had to make some adjustments there. So this was fine, but it left us wanting. We wanted to improve the system, and there were some limitations even within using these options. So in 19.1, we're happy to announce that we're now using NotaTime. And NotaTime is a library that handles changing time zones. And so specifically, it stores instants, so moments of time, and it stores not an offset from one time zone to another, but it stores the name of that time zone. So then when we need to, we can combine that named time zone and the instant, and we can calculate the appropriate time or the appropriate adjustment based on that named time zone. The nice part about this is if that were to change, if the geopolitical powers that be decide to change how a time zone works, or change the boundary of a time zone or something like that, or change when daylight savings time is, if any of those things were to happen, those named time zones are now something that NotaTime can adjust that calculation. So these are stored not as offsets, but as named time zones, so that if that changes, we can handle it. So specifically, this handles time zones, right? That offset that we need. And it handles daylight savings because it knows when daylight savings is in each of those time zones and how to adjust it. Great, so what does this mean for you? So in Exago, as you upgrade, this does have some required action, but not much. So as you upgrade, what you're specifically going to want to do is you're going to want to set a new property called client time zone name using the API. So as a user is launching Exago, the host application uses either the REST or the .NET API to launch Exago. We've covered this in a past lab as well. If you want to check it out, we can link that as well. But now, one of the things we're definitely going to recommend you set here is the client time zone name. So that property is going to tell Exago, this user is in this particular time zone. Please set this accordingly. If you're setting that name, once you're setting that name, you can, if you want to, remove this time zone offset. It'll sort of be surpassed by that time zone name, and you don't have to worry about having the external interface set up. If you were using these, you now can phase those out over time as you choose. So the really important one here, though, is as you upgrade to 19.1, using this new property and setting it via the API. The last piece is the scheduler, and particularly if you're using the scheduler queue, and we'll talk on that in just a bit. So what I wanted to do is just give a simple example. So in .NET, there's a property, it's going to be under setup data, general, the property is called client time zone name, try to keep it nice and obvious here. And then in REST, you'll just do a patch call on, there's a settings object, endpoint, and there's under general settings, you can adjust the client time zone name. So for example, here we can say America/New York, that's one of the time zones. Great. So one of the things at the end, I'll launch over to the NotaTime site. So if you're curious what the available time zones are, They're listed, of course, they're linked from our admin console. They're listed in our documentation, as well as on the Noda TimeZone site. So I can show you that in just a moment. So the last piece here is the scheduler queue. So no action, if you're using the scheduler queue, no action is required if you're utilizing what we call the queue API objects. But because it is an extensibility feature, because you're writing custom code, you could be parsing the job XML. So a schedule, when you create a schedule, has a series of settings it keeps. We call those jobs. Those are XML. They're stored as XML files. If you're parsing or modifying those files directly instead of using this queue API object, you may need to take action on your scheduler queue. If you have any questions about that in your particular instance, you can always, of course, reach out to our support or services team through our knowledge base. We'll be happy to take a look and help you, double check or adjust as needed or discuss what that might look like for you. So actually, a little surprisingly, I did say this is going to be a short lab. That's going to cover it for us. I will pause in just a moment for questions and we can navigate over to the Noda Time site. But I do just want to note that on July 24th, my colleague Nick Cortina is going to be giving an advanced user lab. So this is a concept we've come up with here where we want to cover some advanced topics, but in a way that is approachable for end users, for folks who are writing reports who may not be tech savvy. So if you have some folks on your team who want to learn some basics around sort of concepts of databases and SQL, he's going to be doing a short lab there on that. And then our next lab is scheduled for August 7th, but we haven't landed on a topic yet. So one of the things we always mention is at the end of this lab, as you leave, there's going to be a survey. One of the questions on that survey is topics you'd like to see for future labs. So please let us know. What would you like us to cover? What do you grapple with? What do you want to see done? What do you want more information about? Really, any topic you can think of, definitely appreciate those suggestions as we move forward into August and September's labs. Great, so with that, what I'm going to do is jump over here, and if you're interested in reading up more specifically about Noda Time, their website is nodatime.org, and you can find those here. Of course, in our knowledge base, you can always find articles on this topic as well. So if you want more written information, and those will be linked under the recording here. And if you are interested, this computer file video on time zones and how they're complicated is a really good one. I definitely recommend watching. So with that, I'm just going to pause here and see if there are any questions. Awesome, so I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm just going to call it there. So if you do have any questions though, of course, always please feel free to submit them through our knowledge base to our support and services team. And with that, I'll just say happy reporting.